Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us for our first Griffith Alumni Professional Development webinar for this year, where we'll be looking at the topic of managing change in times of uncertainty. My name is Bridget French. I'm the Senior Alumni Relations Manager at Griffith University. I'm also a very proud alumnus. I'd like to firstly acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which those of us in Australia are respectfully located and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. In a few moments, I'll introduce you to our guest speaker, who's going to share with us her insights and experience in strategic organisational change and give us valuable and effective techniques for ongoing success when managing change in the workplace. All of us have endured significant changes over the last couple of years, and constantly adapting and remaining agile certainly has its challenges. So I hope all of you are comfortable wherever you are, perhaps with your lunch or a cup of tea, and you can settle in and listen and learn for the next hour. If you like online activities, we'll be bringing you a lot more of these lunchtime webinars this year, and do remember that there's our entire back catalogue on our YouTube channel. We also live stream a number of events on different topics, so do keep an eye out on your emails and on our social media for information on how to register. If further education is something you're looking for, especially if you're looking for new skills or new inspiration, you might want to consider some further study in Griffith's new range of more than 100 stackable professional courses, which you can tailor to your needs. You can choose to study a standalone course or stack 4 courses to obtain a graduate certificate in professional studies. What's especially exciting is that graduated Griffith alumni receive 10% off these, so you can find details about this on our alumni benefits website. Now, just a few reminders on our webinar tips. If you have questions for our presenter, you can ask these in the Q&A panel on your screen. If you'd like to remain anonymous when asking your questions, please tick the anonymous box before posting it, and questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. I also do need to let you know that this session is being recorded and content will be shared at a later date. So if you'd like to post a question but don't want to be identified, then please check that anonymous box. If you want to share any key learnings from today or simply carry on this conversation, please use the hashtag Griffith Alumni on your social platforms such as Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. I am now so delighted to introduce you to our presenter today, Jody Keys, Griffith University's Director Transformation. Jody is a results-driven transformation leader with 20 years of experience delivering strategic change programs across education, government, mining and transport services. She has extensive experience in strategy development, operational transformation, program management and organisational change with an authentic leadership style and a really practical approach to driving transformation through complex organisations. At Griffith University, Jody is currently responsible for delivering whole of university strategic change enabled by service transformation, program structure review, student experience design, digital investment and process improvement. Today we are so grateful to her for joining us to share some of her knowledge and expertise with us. So now I will ask Jody to turn on her camera, unmute her microphone and I'll hand you over.
Thank you, Bridget, and welcome good evening, everyone. Thank you for the warm introduction, Bridget. That was lovely. I'm just going to get my screens up and sharing, and hopefully you can all see that now. Okay, as I said, I'm pleased to be joining you today, and I'm based here at our Nathan campus in Brisbane, and I'm really excited to be able to share my thoughts and experience in managing change in times of uncertainty. In my role as Director of Transformation at Griffith, managing change is something that occupies my time on a daily basis. And over the last couple of years, the volume and pace of change has been hard and fast. During the time we have together this afternoon, we're only going to skim the surface of this topic, but hopefully you will walk away with a few practical strategies that you can apply in your own organisations. I thought we could have this conversation across 4 focus areas. I will start with an understanding of the context and the current environment we are all operating in. And I'll then talk about managing change for ourselves, managing change with others, and managing change at an organisational level. Each of these topics, as you can appreciate, could be full courses on their own. So I'm going to focus on a few themes that I think can make a big impact on how we experience and embed change. Leaders across all industries, sectors, countries and markets are being asked to manage levels of change not experienced before, and through a period of ongoing certainty. As a community, we've spent the last 2 years in a period of reactive change, responding to the pandemic, adjusting ourselves and our teams to new ways of working, and embracing technology in our lives like never before. Here in Brisbane and northern New South Wales, we've been responding to a major flood event since February, which has ruined thousands of homes and businesses. And across the world, we're all watching with sadness and becoming more and more anxious as the devastating situation in the Ukraine escalates. In addition to these global and societal forces, the level of change in our own organisations and workplaces does not seem to be slowing down. In the higher education sector, we've had significant disruption. When campuses closed, academics and students had to adapt quickly to online learning. And with a significant reduction in international students onshore in 2020 and 2021, the financial impact meant many universities undertook restructures and staff redundancies. And now, as we're returning to campus, we have to determine what's the right balance of physical and virtual presence for us, for students, as well as for staff. Earlier this week, my team shared how they and many of their colleagues are feeling, and it is clear to me that people are tired. However, Gartner says that change is the new constant, with the typical organisation today having undertaken 5 major changes in the past 3 years, and nearly 75% of them expecting to increase these types of changes in the next 3 years. Yet, unfortunately, also according to Gartner, half of these change initiatives fail, and only 34% are a clear success. Sorry guys. So building on that backdrop, what I've described is often referred to as a VUCA environment. So originating from the US military, the VUCA acronym was originally used to describe the conditions in war zones during the Cold War. Nothing could be predicted and everything could change from one day to the next. This VUCA world was characterised by 4 properties: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The scenarios I described before, a pandemic, a disaster response, and an escalating threat of war, are all good examples of a VUCA environment. But VUCA also characterises challenges in our local environments, in workplaces and the organisations. For example, when we're implementing new technology or systems, during organisational restructures, or when we might be introducing new products or service offerings into our business. The contemporary workplace is changing and will continue to change at a rapid pace, and VUCA helps us describe the change environment and think about how we might manage that. The effects of VUCA on our staff are broad, and various words can be used to describe how people feel: paralysed or stuck, unproductive, distrusting, helpless, fatigued. There are, however, some staff that feel much more comfortable in VUCA, and they may describe how they feel in a more positive way, such as opportunity or renewal. Change management helps us design strategies for managing VUCA and to help us make decisions and lead others through the changes that we pursue. We will touch on some of these strategies today, but before we do, I would like you all to consider this question. Who is responsible for managing change? Who's responsible for navigating this VUCA environment that I've just described? It sounds like a tough gig with lots of pressure and expectation. Is it CEOs and executive teams? Is it project leaders and managers? Change experts and advisors? Middle managers? People leaders? I expect for many of you joining the session today, you'll be in roles or positions within your organisations where you feel some level of responsibility. You may be a project sponsor or a manager with a critical deadline who's really worried about asking their organisation to take on more change this year. You may be a people leader doing your best to balance day-to-day operations while constantly having to respond to the crisis environment around you. Or you may be a team member who's still trying to understand your new normal, with some of your colleagues working on site and some of them working from home. I propose that all of these people are responsible for managing change in some way, and that managing change is everyone's responsibility. I propose that we all have a role to play in managing change, depending on our position within an organisation or the type of change or circumstance we are managing. We all experience and need to manage some kind of change in our life and at some point through our career. We'll be responsible for managing change for ourselves, responsible for managing change with others, and responsible for managing change at an organisational level. And for some of us, we might be responsible for all three. Through these focus areas, I'm going to share some strategies and techniques that are relevant depending on the role you're in. And these strategies aren't binary. They're often applicable to both managing change for ourselves and the way we manage change with others and across the organisation. But before we get into it, I just wanted to emphasise my comment from the beginning of the session that managing change is complex and a discipline in its own right. There's an extensive body of knowledge and decades of research that have contributed to modern approaches to change management, including a number of great resources that are available widely online and regular thought leadership pieces that are shared across the community on platforms such as LinkedIn. So the first focus area I wanted to talk about today is managing change for ourselves. I'm a big fan of the rule of three and the philosophy that ideas given in threes are clearer and more memorable to an audience. So for each of these areas, you're going to see a theme. I'm going to highlight three topics for us to talk about. The first one is shifting your mindset. So there's a perception that we can manage change by controlling the world around us. However, the research tells us that change is most effectively managed within ourselves. The psychology of change management is well documented, and there are coaches and HR professionals with expertise that can help us navigate and grow as professionals. We've seen a greater awareness in recent years of our mental health and understanding the importance of overall well-being, so many of us are seeking professional help in our personal lives. The same can be said for our professional lives. Through coaching, expert professionals can provide us with advice and support when going through change. I'm not a qualified coach or an org psych, but I've worked with some fantastic professionals in recent years who have been able to bring focus to helping leaders prepare themselves and their teams in times of change. In my experience, this can be valuable both for the individual and for the people around them. One of the frameworks some coaches use when talking about change, which I think is really helpful, is the growth mindset. Dr. Carol Dweck talks about the power of mindset in her book, Mindset, The Psychology of Success, and how by making a shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, you can build resilience and increase your chance of success. Dr. Dweck writes that a growth mindset and some of the behaviours that come from that help people prepare themselves and lead others with a higher level of empathy and emotional intelligence. For example, when we're in a growth mindset, we tend to focus on how we can embrace and invite challenges, whereas in a fixed mindset, the focus is often on avoiding challenges. And then if we are faced with obstacles, when we're in a fixed mindset, we tend to give up easily, whereas in a growth mindset, we're more likely to persist and continue. The key message I would like you to take away is that there's value in understanding your own mindset and increasing our level of self-awareness. And coaches are a great resource to help us explore that. The second area I wanted to talk to you about is focusing on things that both matter and that you can control. This is a simple technique that I use both in my job and at home for myself and my teenage son. Keep focused on the things that both matter and that you can control. It's very easy to feel overwhelmed when there's a lot of change and uncertainty, and most of us will have had days or weeks where we feel overwhelmed or stuck. Being able to ruthlessly prioritise in the spirit of Agile can help you focus and feel more in control, allowing you to move forward. You don't need to do this alone. It's often better to do it in collaboration with others so you can have a shared understanding of what are the highest priorities. On a practical level, it helps if you can make these priorities visible to others, using things like regular reporting or daily stand-ups. Also, having regular one-on-ones with your leader to manage expectations and checking in that you're both aligned can be really helpful. And don't forget to ask for feedback regularly. Don't set and forget. I've included invest in self-care here, and because as humans, because as humans, and this is particularly true of women, many of us are wired to help others. And in the face of change and uncertainty, we're trying to put on a brave face, hope and positivity to all of those around us. But that takes a lot of energy. And I've found, particularly over the last couple of years, that by the end of the day, I'm exhausted and I feel absolutely drained. I often hear the analogy of putting your own oxygen mask on first before helping others. And I think this is particularly important during a VUCA and uncertain time. Those who know me know that I'm still working on this for myself. And there's a couple of practices that I try and keep top of mind to help keep myself in check. Set boundaries. Ensure you're not working around the clock and that you're getting regular and quality sleep. If you're tired, you're often not productive anyway. Be kind to yourself. Work out what recharges your batteries and make time to do it. It's important to fill your cup so you have both mental and physical reserves during times of change. And phone a friend, vent, share stories, empathise. Those connections are really important as we need to look after ourselves and make sure our mental well-being is sound. The second area of focus I want to talk about is managing change with others. How, as leaders, we can support others through change. When working on a significant change program here at Griffith, an executive coach we worked with shared this quote from Maya Angelou, an American poet and civil rights activist. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I love that. And on a similar note, let's start with putting people first. Change initiatives typically fail when people aren't involved, they don't understand, they don't believe in, or they're not engaged in the change. It's really important that as leaders, we proactively communicate and help people understand the change. This creates a desire to change and encourages people to take action. When we have these conversations with our staff, it's important that we're empathetic and that we validate our employees by saying things like, "I hear you." However, avoid those qualifying statements as it erodes the empathy and backs people into a corner. So for example, avoid comments like, "I hear you, but we need to fix it," or "I understand you're stressed, at least you still have jobs." Instead, try and use phrases like, "What can I do to help?" Or "I understand this is a challenge. How are we going to take care of this together?" It's also really important that we encourage our people to connect, interact, maintain their relationships, both between themselves as colleagues and between leaders and staff. These connections should be frequent and consistent. Scheduling weekly or bi-weekly connections. I do this with my team, and once again, I'm not perfect and I don't always get it right, but some things I try to keep in mind when having these connections are: be prepared and present during the time we have together, not distracted by my phone or my laptop. Be authentic in what you say. As leaders, we often hide our feelings and reactions, but sometimes it's actually useful to share that, so we aren't doing ourselves any favours and we will erode their trust by not being open and authentic. And build your relationships by sharing your own challenges and experiences. Give examples of how you understand, have faced some difficulties yourself and what you did to work through it. The second theme around managing change with others is that we should pay attention to the high and low points in momentum. There will be both high and low points during change. It's natural, it's expected. As leaders, we can proactively manage and leverage these points in time. During the high points, celebrate wins, fuel that momentum, give kudos in team meetings to recognise success. I like to use what I call people shares at the start of team meetings. It allows me to acknowledge and recognise great performance or awesome behaviour that I really want to encourage. At low points, reset your communication strategies to listen to employees and rebuild that trust and support. Resistance can be poisonous to a change program. However, it's much easier to counter this resistance if you identify it early. Pay attention to the signs of resistance, including a lack of action, withholding information, or spreading misinformation, and put in place communication and feedback loops with employees to help identify signs of resistance. And then when you do see it, take action fast. And on that note, the final theme I wanted to share when managing change with others is that it's really important to ask for feedback, and then when you get that feedback, make sure you listen to it. At an organisational change level, understanding how you can gather feedback is really important. Once you have that feedback, listening to it, what it's telling you, and knowing how and when to respond is just as important. Many organisations already have employee engagement surveys, which they run either annually or biannually. But during a period of significant change, it might be helpful to increase the frequency of these and to ask really specific questions as part of this survey about what change is happening in your particular organisation. This gives you a really useful feedback loop so you can adjust your support strategy. At Griffith, the key way for us to gather feedback for staff is through our employee engagement and pulse surveys, which we ran more frequently during the early phases of the pandemic and again in 2021. We also ran a dedicated Have Your Say survey during this time, where we gathered specific and targeted feedback from our staff on the proposed change we were executing. Well, I'm not advocating that we survey our workforce continually, but if they're well designed and timed, surveys can be a really rich source of information and insight for leaders. We also at Griffith increased the frequency of our town hall meetings over the last couple of years, with monthly or bi-monthly forums the average throughout 2021 and 2020. Thankfully, the logistics of organising these types of forums are much simpler than they used to be. Staff are much more comfortable using platforms like the one we're using today. And interestingly, at Griffith, we've seen a much higher level of engagement from staff during these virtual sessions than we did when we held them face-to-face. People like to use the Q&A and chat functions, and they could do it, as Bridget said earlier, anonymously, which people have really engaged with. And the final focus area for us to talk about today is how to manage change at a whole of organisation level. The focus here is those large-scale, high-impact changes that touch the majority of the workforce, such as shifting to remote working or a large-scale technology change. As I've talked a lot about today, leaders are up against macro factors in society, company culture, organisational momentum, and human psychology when managing change. Working with a change management model to make it happen is helpful to guide them with the tools that they need through that process. Change management models help leaders connect their objectives to action, which, if done well, increases the likelihood of success. There are a variety of well-established change management models from which to choose. ProSci's ADKAR model, Lewin's change management model, Kotter's change management model, and many more. Each model varies, but all of them centre around understanding the change, identifying people's needs, and planning for and implementing the change. In my experience, it doesn't really matter what model you adopt, as long as you implement the plan well and you engage your people through the process. We want to empower our employees through communication. It's such an essential part of effectively managing any change. A vision for change is only as powerful as the communication that supports it. You can have a great idea, but if nobody knows about it, it's not going to be effective. Good communications gives clarity for why the change is needed and generates a sense of urgency for change in your people. If you fail to communicate well, you will fail to drive meaningful change. Some key points I've learned over the years around good communication are It's not a one-time transfer of information. It requires commitment, it requires clarity, and it requires consistency. It should engage the employees in a two-way communication style. Focus groups, informal feedback collections, they're great ways to communicate and share key messages with the community. And when you involve your staff, they feel valued. And when staff feel valued, they're more likely to embrace change and participate in making it happen. When communication is not done well, such as when people receive conflicting messages or when they're getting too many or too little messages, they're likely to be confused and not engage with the change at all. So some strategies I've seen that help with good communication. From the onset, ensure that the roles and responsibilities for communication are clear. If you can, especially on large projects, try and gain communications resources dedicated to the change throughout the journey. This helps ensure that messages remain consistent throughout the change process. Use multiple channels and meet people where they're at. That is, use a combination of push channels where they can get the communication whether they've asked for it or not, such as email and staff forums, and pull channels where they can find more information if they want to in their own time, things like websites and online newsletters. But always be clear and use plain language and reinforce key messages as part of your communication strategy, and look to try and engage both people's hearts and their minds. And the final theme I wanted to explore today is around active and visible executive sponsorship. So a recent ProSci survey said that active and visible sponsorship is the top reason change initiatives succeed. I tend to agree. The impact of good leadership on managing change is well known and researched. However, the problem is that many leaders don't understand the vital role that they play in that change. They're often busy and time poor, so carving out space can be challenging. If your leaders understand and embrace their roles, you're in a strong position to be able to advance successfully. The best change programs that I've been a part of included an active and visible sponsor. In practical terms, this looks like a sponsor leading the key communications with really considered and authentic messages in their own voice. The sponsor staying actively involved in the change and helping the organisation understand what it means for their people and their broader industry. Painting a really inspiring and compelling picture of what the future will be and how it will be positive, helping people get a sense of optimism about where you're going and what it will mean for them. And importantly, role modelling. It's a great way to reinforce the message of a change. For example, one that we're all experiencing at the moment is if you're asking your people to come back into the office, be sure you're there yourself. So in wrap up, we went through together a bit of an understanding of the current environment we're operating in, both in our personal and professional lives, and how that environment has been and will continue to drive rapid change for us all. I then shared some practical strategies and techniques based on my own experience, which I hope you'll find useful to navigate these changes in your own workplaces and careers. And finally, the key message I hope you take away from you today is that managing change is everyone's responsibility. And there is some comfort and confidence in knowing that you're not alone and there is a lot of support and resource available to help you. If you do need to drop off, I hope you found this information really helpful and useful, and we really appreciate your time and for engaging in the Griffith community. Otherwise, hopefully some of you will want to stay on, and for those that do, I'm happy to answer some questions. Thank you. I'm just reading the responses now. So love the don't ignore resistance. People are trying to alert their organisations to issues and should be seen positively. Great, thanks Anonymous. These are the current levels of uncertainty with the world in recent times that has led to an increasingly conservative management position, especially when it comes to risk management through change or project implementations. or has it been a natural growth of conservative management across most industry sectors? Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's a question and an observation. I agree. I do think in recent uncertain times there's been an increase in, I guess, that top-down decision-making and that more conservative position taken with decisions being held at the sort of the highest level of organisations. Very conscious of the impact, I think, of change on staff and wellbeing. I think that's a lot of what drives that sort of more conservative approach for managing change when we're going through such a volatile period. The Spotify model is a people-driven, autonomous approach for scaling agile that emphasises the importance of culture and network. How would you feel about implementing the Spotify management model to a university like Griffith? Great question, and I think definitely aspirations at an organisation like Griffith to adopt a lot of the techniques and approaches that are taken by, contemporary organisations like Spotify. There are some barriers and some challenges that universities and other sort of large government-like organisations have within their cultures and in their workplaces. But I think it's a great observation, and I'm sure it's a goal and an aspiration of many of our leaders across Griffith and other universities. Okay, I believe there is a principle of VUCA and also VUCA Prime. What is the key difference between the two approaches? Anonymous, I actually don't know. So great question. I will go and do some research after this session today. But yeah, thank you. Sorry, I actually don't know the answer. So if anyone does know, perhaps they can drop a little reply into the chat. Anonymous again, how do we apply change models to rapidly changing and escalating situations like the pandemic or natural disasters? Good two-way communication and planning is very difficult in these circumstances. Yeah, absolutely. It's important and essential, but it's not easy. I think we need to take a, we're really blending, I guess, a response that is crisis-like. It's sort of that crisis and incident response together with change management models in a lot of the environment we've been through in the last couple of years. So I think some of the principles around that we talked about today around communication and connection and engagement with our people, I think that there's some really good foundations through change models that we can apply when we are responding to pandemic and those sort of crisis situations. So I think there's some techniques and repeatable methods that are really valuable in those scenarios. Michael, there are plenty of materials courses available for change management practitioners, but are you aware of anything similar to help exec sponsors understand their roles so that it's not exclusively us managing upwards to help upskill them? Another great question. I'm not aware of anything off the shelf for exec sponsors, but I'd hazard a bet that ProSci or others would probably have some relevant resources that you could use to help with that awareness and education of our exec sponsors. I know at Griffith we undertook a couple of years ago to develop some training and materials for board members, which in most cases are exec sponsors, just to help them understand, I guess, the roles and expectations we as a team have of them in taking on those positions. So there's definitely literature and material out there that you can adopt and adapt, but I think it's it's a good question and something that I think really helps those sponsors so they can feel that they can confidently fulfil their role for us as well. David, thank you. We will be able to use these strategies in our future career changes. Great, thanks, David. What is the difference between change associated with restructures and other types of change? there are lots of similarities and there are lots of differences. So it's quite a broad question, but I guess at the simplest level, we both, whether it's a restructure or implementing a new piece of technology like we talked about before, we're still shifting from where we are today. So I think that's a similarity, is we need to understand what's the delta, where we are today and where do we want to go, and so we can have a really clear understanding of what that change difference is that we need to make. But I think with restructures, there is definitely an even stronger emphasis on people-led change, and I talked a little bit about putting people first in how we're managing a change. So, but I think with restructures that is absolutely heightened, and we want to really make sure that we have the right strategies and techniques in our plan that will help us manage through those high people impact type changes. I think some of the techniques are to make sure that we've got, and this is something that we did here at Griffith, is actually to have our leaders be very active and responsible and accountable for change. So they are really the conduit between what can sometimes be seen as a top of the organisation type decision or change, through to where the impact is actually being felt. So making sure that we're using all layers of the organisation to help us manage that change and support our people through those initiatives. Marty, how would you suggest to deal with the odd employee that is the typical can't teach an old dog new tricks, as they aren't open to change and difficult to communicate with when applying the change model suggestion? Yeah, great question. And change resistance is, I wouldn't even describe that as change resistance. I think the scenario you're articulating there is perhaps not necessarily deliberate. It might be just that they aren't familiar with change, or perhaps are sitting more in that fixed mindset that I described earlier. So I think it's about connection. I think it's about opportunity and being really authentic and transparent with that particular employee about what it is we're trying to achieve and why, and helping them on their own journey to get there. So yeah, I think a people-led approach takes us to being quite empathetic to that employee and making sure we adjust our style accordingly. What's the top piece of advice you could offer a small business in managing time, those without resources or specialised skills in comms and risk management, etc.? Good question. Small business managing, and I'm reflecting here. My family own a small business, and I just think about the challenges that they've been through over the last couple of years. It's a little bit back to what I just said before. I said, being really authentic and working with what you have. So using the communication channels and resources that you have to share key messages. I think being really clear on what those key messages are. So I think we talked about specialist skills in comms. I think leaders of small businesses often will have a very articulate view of who they are and what their vision is. So trying to get that written down and communicated and anchoring your change around that vision, I think is could be a useful technique. What in case when all responses fail? I'm sorry, Anonymous, I'm not really sure I understand that one. Maybe if you could post it again with a little bit more information for me. And what have you seen working in preparing middle and senior leaders to manage change well? How do we best prepare our leaders given they are vital to the success of the change initiative? Yeah, great question, Kylie. Preparing middle and senior leaders to manage change well, I think, is really about arming them with really clear understanding of the change, so they feel really confident in their messaging and what they are sharing with their staff. Supporting them through their own change experience. So if they are able to manage themselves through the change, then it makes it much simpler and easier for them to be able to manage others through that change. So giving them the support that they need. I talked earlier about coaching. I think that's a fantastic technique, combined with training or development, so that leaders really understand the change process and have some really sort of practical steps that they can take and use with their teams as they support them through change. And how do we best prepare our leaders given their vital? So yeah, I think having really thoughtful and structured support mechanisms for our leaders is how we can best prepare them for the change and ask them to lead. Keen to hear your thoughts and experiences on how organisations in the new ways of working are measuring their organisational change effectiveness. Thanks, Anonymous. Yeah, good question. New ways of measuring their organisational change effectiveness. I think it's really about understanding what are they trying to achieve through new ways of working, or what's different from previous ways of working and what they would measure as success. And comparing it to now. So I think for me, if we're changing to new ways of working, what does success look like? Identifying that, defining it, and then measuring it and using some data to assess whether we've achieved that. So, and what would you suggest to reset organisations from reactionary decision making to planned long-term change management? Thanks, Mark. To planned long-term change management. Yeah, I think it's a good question. A good comment. I would say that's around. You kind of need to work with your executive and your leaders to understand what is the aspiration, where are you headed, linking your change agenda to your strategy and your overarching vision can really help you crystallize what is the need that you need to then manage against. So if we have a really clear understanding of where we're going, what that change is going to look like, we can then have some good strategies around how we manage that change. I think that question mark also really kind of bubbles up to strategy. So, and really trying to link what's our vision as an organisation, and therefore how do we then respond and manage the change towards that. And if instead we take advantage of uncertain times to implement changes, are we using the same methods, models to manage the changes we want to make? Sorry, I'm going to read that again, Anonymous. So I think, yes, I think the heart of the question is if we want to take advantage of these uncertain times to implement change, and there is a bit of a phrase, never always want to take advantage of a good crisis. So are we using the same methods, models to manage the changes we want to make? Yeah, from my perspective, the model or the framework is probably less important. I think it's actually about understanding what is the change, being able to articulate it and define it, and then message it so we can, so people understand it. So yeah, I think it is the same methods and models. I don't think it's different. I would say that the pace and perhaps the spirit that we approach some of the use of those models. So for example, I think that really senior executive sponsorship for changes through uncertain times is probably more important than it is for some in what I might say is normal times. So I think we might emphasise different strategies or techniques depending on in those sort of high risk or uncertain times. Anonymous, do you think that these world events will lead to an amount of decentralization and a hierarchy breakdown and rethink as lower managers and employees realise that they can make the decision that their health, flooded house, mental health is more important than upper management deciding that it's always BAU even during disasters? Big question, Anonymous. I'm not sure if I have the answer to that one. But I think you're really kind of hitting on something I mentioned earlier, where I think decision making in a lot of organisations and workplaces has really been centralised in response to a crisis. But I do see that leaders are starting to shift their position on that, and as you know, we start to see some return to normal, leaders are really trying to actively delegate and empower their teams with more and more control. I think in a crisis situation, there is a certain level of accountability that senior leaders have that drives some of that behaviour. But yes, I think hopefully that pushing it down will continue on that trajectory as we hopefully reduce the number of sort of crises and incidents that we're responding to. Cash Thompson, thanks Jody, really good overview. What are you observing in terms of psychosocial risks and stress due to change in workplaces? Yeah, Cash, it's a really good question, and I think probably not one I feel very qualified to answer, to be quite honest. So, but I do, I guess, from an outside perspective, I think there has definitely been an increase in those risks and the impact that it's having on staff through these uncertain times. So as far as specifics about what I'm seeing and observing, I won't really comment. I don't think I'm probably in the right position, Cash, to share much insight there, but yeah, hopefully that, I think I am agreeing with the direction of your sentiment. So during COVID, the Chief Health Officers on a daily basis provided updates, but this went further in managing expectations and change in a fluid environment. When they started to step back, there was a massive information void and everyone felt lost for a period. How can these types of transition periods be better managed to empower the change? Yeah, it's a great observation, I think, and probably something that a good change and comms plan should consider. The change, there is a tail to a change. It doesn't just finish at implementation, and how do we continue to transition that to more of a BAU state as required. So my formal answer would be plan for it. But I think it's a good observation of what we've seen in a really visible and large scale crisis and change situation. Feng, what will you do if an employee anxiety about go back to office, worry about COVID, prefer work from home? Yeah, I think as I mentioned before, we need to take a really people-led approach to change. That to me is probably more of a HR conversation. I think around how do we make sure that we are supporting our employees. Yeah, I'll probably leave that there, Feng, if that's okay. But I hear your point. I think there is a lot of anxiety across the community around what returning to office environments means. So, Kylie, what are some lessons you have learnt personally in managing change? Great question. That was, I think, Kylie, you asked a good one earlier as well. So, what have I learnt in managing change? So expect the unexpected, particularly in the last couple of years. I think it's really important to plan. I think change management is a real discipline. As I mentioned earlier, I think there are experts in this space. I think use them and take the time to assess the situation and really plan for what you want to do. So I think there can be some skepticism around, change and comms planning and the sort of formal part of managing change. But I actually think having a really defined, visible, cohesive approach to change helps ensure that all of our leaders are on the same page and people have a greater awareness and understanding about what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to get there. So I think document it. I think people-led is really important. I feel like one of the lessons I have is that you can never engage enough with your people and your staff. I think people feel valued, and if they feel valued and they feel like they've had an opportunity to contribute, then they are more likely to be open and receptive to the change. So I think really engaging your people is really critical. And communication, I think, is again critical. I think we can over communicate sometimes as change professionals. I think sometimes what's the centre of our world as somebody that's delivering a change, we might think that everyone wants to know about it, but often we probably over communicate. So I think being really mindful and strategic about when we communicate and how often we communicate is really important, and a lesson I've probably learnt over the last couple of years. And what do we do when we are not sure about the end result, for example, when the change is imposed due to external forces? How do we communicate when even the message is uncertain? Yeah, great question, I think. And I look at even, our Vice Chancellor here at Griffith. I think she's a great role model for how to do this really well. I think she's very authentic and visible in her communication approach. So I think be real, be honest, and be truthful. I think that's all a good leader can do when we're in the sorts of change environment that we have been. Okay, and the last question, important that communication stays aligned to the values promoted in the business, otherwise integrity is lost. However, what happens if the change clashes with these values? For example, value of caring about people versus announcing redundancies. Yeah, great question. And I think that is something that we always need to be very mindful of when we are developing communications and thinking about how we message change. The value of caring with people and announcing redundancies, they do seem to clash, but I think what you can do is implement the change with care for our people. I think separating the actual change with the approach and the way we might go about it is probably how I would and like to think that we have tried to here at Griffith, but also at other organisations who have gone through these sorts of restructures and redundancies that you're referring to here, is always keeping that, care for our people at the top of our mind and in our approach to how we communicate with staff and make some decisions. Great. Okay. Well, thank you everyone, and thank you for your questions. I might pass back to Bridget.
Oh, thank you so much, Jody, for that incredibly insightful presentation. Constant change really has become such a huge part of our lives, hasn't it, professionally and personally? And I just think it was so wonderful to hear some really practical and tangible tools and techniques to help us manage this. I hope all of you got some really great takeaways from Jody's presentation today. I especially loved learning about the VUCA model, which I wasn't familiar with, and some practical strategies around mindset, self-care, boundaries, clear communication across those multiple channels, and the fact that we're all responsible for managing change. And Jody, great advice on being authentic and listening to our staff and our teams and really engaging with them. That was absolutely wonderful. And thank you to all of you as well for your participation and sharing. It was really fantastic to see so many questions. There were quite a few questions that we didn't get to, so we will look to answer those with Jody at a future date that we'll share down the track. Don't worry if you didn't get it all down. We're going to send you an email in the coming weeks with a link to the recording of this webinar and also with the slides that Jody shared today. This email will also contain a short event feedback survey, and we'd really appreciate you taking the time to complete that so that we can continue to improve what we offer for you and all of our alumni community. If you want to know more about what we do in alumni engagement or the ways which you can continue to be involved with your university, please get in touch anytime. We love hearing from you. We're on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. Just search for Griffith University Alumni, and we hope that your association with us will continue for many, many years to come. I want to really sincerely thank Jody for being here with us today and for her time and that excellent presentation, and thank you for joining us online from all around the world. Before we go, you may have seen that we've launched this year's Outstanding Alumni Awards. Our Alumni Awards recognise, celebrate and acknowledge the diverse achievements of our alumni across their fields of endeavour and in their communities. Last year in 2021, we were able to recognise such amazing alumni as Joe Brum, creator of Bluey, and a raft of other alumni who are really making it matter in their world today, including Dr. Dinesh Palapana, OAM, doctor, lawyer and disability advocate. I'd like to share a short video with you all featuring Dinesh. I'll let him tell you all about this year's Alumni Awards, which close on the 3rd of April at 5 p.m. Please, can you have a think of an outstanding alumnus you know, maybe you are one, and you might wish to nominate them. It was so wonderful to have you all here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Seeing the incredible work that our alumni has done last year gave me so much energy and made me proud to be a part of this institution. Hi everyone, I am Dinesh Palapana. I'm a doctor, lawyer, disability advocate and a researcher at Griffith University. I was the 2021 Outstanding Young Alumni of the Year at the university. My mum actually nominated me, so I am mum's biggest fan and she's my biggest fan. This was a really special moment for me because Griffith has been a big part of my life and the institution enabled me to become a doctor and to be here talking to you today. It was more special for me to see the amazing community that Griffith has built over the years. We need to recognise the incredible work that our alumni is doing out there in the world because we have some incredible people that have been a part of Griffith. And that's why I encourage you to nominate for this year's Alumni of the Year Awards. So pick someone that you think is doing some amazing work, and there are so many out there from our institution. Log on to the website and put in your nomination.